To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And please join us for a moment of silence. Thank you. Starting off with citizen concern. Anything to be said that is not on the agenda, please keep comments to 3 minutes, and please be aware to silence your cell phones. Anybody to be heard for anything not on the agenda? All right, seeing none, we're going to move on to item 2, which is approval of the agenda. I'll move that.
Second.
I have a motion that's by Raddick, second by Taylor. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? And that passes 4-0. For the consent agenda, items 3 through 8 constitute a he's at parent-teacher conferences. He's not going to be able to attend. Correct. Items 3 through 8 constitute a consent agenda of routine action items to be considered by one motion. Items pass unanimously unless a separate vote is requested by a board member. Item 3 is the approval of the minutes of the February 15th, 2022 meeting. Item 4 is approval of claims. Item 5 from Building Services, approval of items to be auctioned per personnel property disposition policy. Item 6 from Human Resources, A is approval of memorandum of personnel transactions, and B is the authorization to initiate the hiring process. Item 7 from the County Auditor is approve an application for a 12-month Class C liquor license with outdoor service and Sunday sales privileges for Lofted View events effective December 5th of 2021. Item 8 from Secondary Roads, approve the underground utility permit for Mid-American Energy and direct the chair to sign the permits.
Is that 22?
Yeah, is that supposed to be 21 or 22 there on that auditor?
The effective date, it says 12/5/21, I assume, or is it backdated on number
Item 7.
Michelle. I believe that's backdated.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
I'll move the consent agenda, Mr. Chair.
I'll second. Motion by Taylor, second by Raddick. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That passes 4-0. Moving on to item 9A from Secondary Roads, receive bids for gravel production, return them to the county engineer to review and recommendation.
Did you receive many bids? Does everybody like to keep track? We received 2 bids for the gravel production at the Little Sioux Pit. First bid is from Hallett Materials, excavate crush 300,000 tons, $725 per ton, for a total of $2,175,000. Again, 725, 2,175,000. Second bid is from Bedrock Gravel Incorporated of Schleswig. $6.75 a ton for $2,025,000. We have a clear low bidder.
That was Bedrock.
Bedrock Gravel of Schleswig, Iowa.
I move to receive.
Second. We have a motion by DeWitt, second by Raddick to receive. Any discussion?
Mark, what were you hoping for in terms of pricing and?
Well, this is right in the ballpark for us. A couple of years ago, we had received a bid for $895 for similar work. Over the last couple of years, we've been trying some different ways of bidding the gravel to lower our cost. Best prices we've had recently are we're at the railroad pit. We paid $424 a ton, but we had also already pulled it out of the ground and stockpiled it. That would have come in right around $6.25 for the work that was done in mining it, putting it in a pile for production. So, you know, that was by far the cheapest we had gotten. There's no risk for the contractor. There's no, you know, he's just got a pile there that he gets to produce from. You know, in this case, they're going to be excavating and producing. So we expected it to be higher than that. But $675 is $2.20 cheaper than what we had been bid on similar work just 2 years ago. And I think it's because we're getting some competitive pricing now. We've got two producers very interested in us. I think $675 is what we're also paying Bedrock for the work that's being done at the Peters Pit right now.
Right.
I thought these were both pretty good bids. We'd always like it lower, but this isn't bad.
I will move to award the bid to Bedrock out of Schleswig. Oh, wait, so we gotta have the vote, sorry. Vote on the receive. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, that passes 4-0 now. I'll move to award the bid to Bedrock out of Schleswig. Motion by Raddick, second by Young. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That passes 4-0.
And this is out of the $10 million TIF-funded bonds that the board has issued for the purpose of the gravel road improvement program.
That's 9.6 billion ounces there.
It's a lot of material.
Item 10 for Board of Supervisors, Jeremy Taylor, information of public, elected official pay is set.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So a couple meetings ago, I made some comments regarding elected officials' pay, something that was discussed at the Farm Bureau meeting by constituents and others asking me questions as to how did we come up with these percentages. And so we have our union employees between 2.25% and 2.75%. Of course, we gave a one-time payment that would be equivalent to bringing them up to 4%, which is what we set for wage plan, our department heads, and so on. I wanted to clearly explain to the public why or how these percentages are even being considered. So by way of background, the sheriff, auditor, treasurer, county attorney, and board of supervisors have their salaries set by a compensation board, which is laid out in Iowa code, and each elected official has representation by which they can advocate their recommendation. The requests this year range from 9%, and I mistakenly put in here auditor, recorder, and it should have been auditor, treasurer. County attorney, 13%, board of supervisors, 22%, and sheriff, 31.15%. County compensation boards currently can take into account comparables, legislation which has an impact this year a lot of counties are feeling, and sometimes the requests of elected officials. These percentage increases are higher by far, of course, than the majority of our 400 employees, and the highest requests I've seen since I've been on the Board of Supervisors the last 8 years. And so the Board of Supervisors, of course, is allowed by code to reduce our percentage separately. We chose as a whole to do so, going from 22% to 0% for FY23. Oftentimes, in my time on the board, elected officials oftentimes advocate, we're taking and advocating for this increase on behalf of our percentage deputies, or those whose salaries are likewise tied to the elected officials' pay. All elected officials' salaries are tied together, with, of course, the exception this year, the Board of Supervisors, which means that if we reduce by a percentage, we have to do so across the board. Something that we explained to constituents at the Farm Bureau meeting, so all percentages have to be reduced equally. There's a new Back the Blue law, which I've spoken with several legislators about. Not sure that all of them knew the repercussions it would have, but Senate File 342 mandates that in setting the sheriff's salary and his percentage deputies, the comp board shall consider like populated city police chiefs, thus the higher percentage recommendation. So trying to explain to the public how we're north of 30% or the different percentages. So while the comp board recommends, the Board of Supervisors sets the final salary and currently cannot increase anyone separately by any mechanism. Now, there is legislation in both the House and the Senate to dissolve compensation boards, something I believe will have legs in the House, and something that I think we may be able to look at even next week as far as the opinion of this board. So Iowa code does not prohibit an elected official from refusing to take a raise, donating to county initiatives or not-for-profit charities, or doing so at a level that puts them at the same percentage as wage plan or union employees. No prohibition against that. And any member of the public can weigh in on the salaries during the public hearing, which is set for March 29th. So just wanted to explain that for the good of the public, in case there were any questions as to why we're considering the percentages that we are. So.
I'm Pat Gill, the Woodbury County Auditor and Recorder, and I'd like to provide some information to Anybody else want a copy? This is what I presented. Okay, just kind of want to go through what Jeremy presented here. And I mean, some of the comments that I heard made at the board meetings and what I've heard publicly. And at first glance, if you don't take it out of context, it seems like the compensation board went crazy when you looked at it. But really the compensation board complied with the law. And I just want to read what 331-907 says. The annual compensation of the auditor, treasurer, sheriff, county attorney, supervisor shall be determined and provided in this section. The county compensation board shall annually review compensation paid to comparable officers in other counties of this state, other states, private enterprise, and the federal government. In setting the salary of the county sheriff, the compensation board shall, and this was contained in the Back the Blue bill that you talked about. It said, and it used to say consider setting, now it said set the sheriff's salary so it is comparable to salaries paid to professional law enforcement administrators, command officers of the State Patrol, Division of Criminal Investigation, Department of Public Safety, and city police chiefs employed, and this was a change, employed by the cities of similar population to the population of the county. And then they are supposed to prepare that compensation board schedule. So I went to the compensation board. I've always pretty regularly attended that meeting because I've helped them as far as just making sure that somebody was there to open the office and tend to them and get them what they needed in order to do their work. This was the first year that I can remember that there were representatives, that all the elected officials attended, and including a member of the Board of Supervisors, the chairperson, at that time. And so what I gave you is what I prepared for the compensation board and gave to them when they met. And that included this section of the new one. So on the first page, you look at the auditor salary by survey, and I did this for most of it. It's by population and then by salary. Woodbury County is now the sixth largest county in the state, 105,941. And the auditor recorder salary is $96,448. Currently, by salary, we're ranked fifth, and I think that's pretty close to right where we should be. Now, when we get to the county treasurer, for years, the treasurer was lacking, but they finally moved the treasurer up to make $1 less than what the auditor was. But they also same rank, sixth by population, fifth by salary. And the county recorder, I included that because this is important, is that the county recorder, we don't have one in Woodbury County. It's been a huge savings to the taxpayers of Woodbury County by not having that. And I'll get to that in just a second. But the county attorney salary was by population, ranked sixth, and but by salary, ranked 11th. Okay. And that's something that they consider. It says right in the law, that's what that compensation board should consider. Other states, Carver County, Minnesota is the one, the population that is closest to Woodbury County. But in Minnesota, they don't have the elected officials. It's kind of like a city. They have an administrator. But if you're looking at those salaries, the county administrator, $178,000. Property and finance director, $161,000. Assistant finance director, $118,000. Land records, $103,000. Supervisor elections, all they do is elections, $106,000 in a similar sized county in Minnesota. Pennington County in South Dakota, Rapid City, they have, I looked their duties up and it was very similar to what we have, but they also had the auditor, treasurer, and the recorder. But if you took that and if you merged those, you took them all together, divided them by 2 times, a 15% increase, because I'm going to get to that, why I use that. But that average would be $108,000 salary for those two positions. I also included, I'm not going to get into this, but the GS-14, because it says you're supposed to consider federal government. And so we looked at the pay range for GS-14, which is similar to the duties of what we do as officials in Woodbury County Financial. The next page is the state employees in Woodbury County, and their salaries are all listed there, and you can tell what they do. One of them is my nephew, Ben Gill, works for the DCI. His salary is $110,000. The next page was when the merger took place in Woodbury County with the auditor and recorder and the treasurer. And what the compensation board had to meet, had to call a special session to come in and discuss what they were going to do with the salaries of the auditor and recorder, merged office, and the treasurer. So they reset in the middle of the year. They reset the county auditor salary back then to $47,450, and the treasurer was $40,000. And this was back in 1992 when they did the merger. So what that amounted to was the auditor and recorder, and this was the compensation board did after they measured what the duties were, what they combined, And they gave a 22% increase to the auditor and recorder during that period of time, and they gave a 12% increase to the treasurer during that period of time. So they valued that, they realized that they were going to receive a savings. The taxpayers of Woodbury County were going to see a savings. And back in 2012, they did a study here of what actually had sold, had saved Woodbury County during that period of time, using a 3% growth factor over the 18 years, because they eliminated the recorder and the deputy recorder position. And after 18 years, this was 10 years ago, the savings was $1.2 million to the taxpayers of Woodbury County that they did that. So the only point I was making was that the taxpayers of Woodbury County are getting a pretty good deal because of the merged offices that we have to do. The next page talks about this was fiscal year 98 rank of where county employees, elected officials, and department heads. And in fiscal year 98, the attorney was the #1 paid employee in the county. The sheriff was #3, secondary roads engineer was 2, and the auditor and recorder was at 4th, and the treasurer 8th. And you can look at all those different department heads there. Fiscal year 22, the attorney fell behind the secondary roads engineer. The sheriff has dropped behind the district health director. The auditor and recorder went down from #4 to #9 within the county. And then you look at the percentage increase of what has occurred since 98 to over fiscal year 22. You can look at the positions here, and honestly, one of the things that I saw here is that the budget and finance director, Dennis and I have talked about this on numerous occasions. But what I really found during that period, doing the study and looking at all those, is that Dennis is vastly underpaid, and so is the human resources director, compared to what I was looking at, those duties that you looked at different places in different counties. But so as far as the increase, the percentage of increase, the auditor and recorder is 14th, and the treasurer 10th, and the sheriff 11th. And so all those other county employees over that period of time did much better as far as getting their raises. And that's fine. That might have been the way it was. But during that period of time, over the years, the human resources director has done matrices for wage plan employees. And it was pretty apparent when I looked at things this year is that's due to happen again for your wage plan employees. So we got to the point here is what the recommendation that I made to the compensation board based on those comparisons that we did. There are two things that enter into wages within the county or any employment, is that is your comparables and your cost of living. That goes on every year. And what I suggested to the board was to, we hadn't had the discussion yet about cost of living, what the board was going to do, but 6% is what what I figured would happen. It was at 7%, I've heard 10%, but 6% is what I projected on this, and this is what I gave to the compensation board. And so based on an adjustment, the attorney, the county attorney, was 11th, and to get to boost him up to where he should be with the other counties, the adjustment was to 149,000, as that's what I said there, and then 6% on top of that for inflation that they have to do. So that's what I suggested to the compensation board. Now the sheriff, that one was real easy because the city of Davenport is right at the same population what Woodbury County is. And his, the sheriff, or the police chief of the city of Davenport is $156,000, and that's what I gave to the compensation board. And that's what it says right in there, shall set. That's what the compensation board does. And the auditor and recorder put it at adjustment to figuring, going back to what the compensation board did when the original merger took place, and give them credit for that as far as what the taxpayers of Woodbury County. And so came up with $110,611, which was the same amount as what Dennis Butler is making, but I didn't want to exceed that because I don't think I should be paid more than Dennis. I think Dennis's value is much more. When you look at, when I checked the city of Sioux City, for Dennis's position, I think is valued just as much as a city finance director, and the top of that range is $140,000. And that's, so I think you're getting a pretty good bargain with Dennis, but that's what I recommended. So I recommended 15% to the comp board for the auditor and recorder, 13% for the attorney, and 32% for the sheriff. And that was complying with the law. You can't take that out of context. That's what that compensation board is supposed to do. So they are supposed to, they followed the law. They complied with the law. And these, and those were not out of line with what recommendations came in across the state in compensation boards. A lot of them, some of them ignored it, but a lot of them were just like this. And that's what has caused, as you referenced, is that the legislature is talking about, there are two compensation board pieces of legislation that are being considered right now. One of them was to actually, I was at the subcommittee meeting for it, and they were talking about is that they wanted to, besides setting that salary for the sheriff, at that they also were going to put in a section that said that the compensation board should consider the economic conditions of the state, the county, and all that. And the Sheriff's Association was strongly opposed to that. And the ISAC was opposed to that because what they're, Iowa State Association of Counties was opposed to that. Because what they have always recognized that nobody really likes the compensation board law the way it is written. But they also, Bill Peterson, who runs ISAC, always says, you know, it's the worst thing in the world until you try to come up with something better. And so those duties are separated right now, is that the compensation board does the comparables. They look at, you know, what the cost of living should be, and they make their recommendations. They present them to the board, and that's done at the budget hearing. That's when that takes place. It's up to the Board of Supervisors to determine the economic health of the county, to make that determination, and that's why it's written the way it is. And I think that system is good. One of the other pieces of legislation in the House that they're considering right now is that you can dissolve the compensation board, or you can continue with it. But one of the sections, it does away with it says you make the final determination, and it does away with that across the board. It also does away with you folks doing something different with your own, the Board of Supervisors recommendations. But it does that, and that becomes very subjective, and that one is really fearful. The supervisors affiliate is in favor of that legislation. The others are, you know, undecided on it. But boy, if you don't like an elected official, that gives a lot of power to the Board of Supervisors to treat somebody unfairly. And that's my read on that bill. But so when I made this recommendation to the compensation board, the compensation board failed on a 3-3 vote. This did, and the only thing that changed is that they moved the recommendation 15% from the auditor and treasurer down to 9%. And that is what passed, and that's what was presented to you. And I think it was a good discussion, and it was very good. I mean, the discussion that you had as far as, what you were going to do with the wage plan employees. And when we get to talking about another item on the agenda, talking about dealing with the 27 pay periods, I also have some information what is going on in different counties. But the things that you, Supervisor Taylor, put on this is, all those are good. Other than it says that the salaries are set by the compensation board. It's a recommendation from the
That's
compensation.
true, I agree.
Right. And so when we get down to, the only thing that I care about every year is that my deputies, Michelle works with Dennis on almost a daily basis, and is that she's treated just as fairly as Dennis is. So when you say elected officials oftentimes advocate that they're taking the increase on behalf of the percentage deputies or those whose salaries are, otherwise likely time, that absolutely is the most important thing to me, is when we're considering these. And when, talk to you folks and talk to the compensation board, is all I want to do is make sure that my deputies are treated just like the wage plan employees, the same amount. Now, the thing that is a little different here is that when we talk about the 27 pay periods, what we can do to work with that. But it's different for elected officials, because when it is set on that, the budget hearing, and that compensation is reported to the Department of Revenue, is that the elected officials are locked. They cannot receive any more than what you folks certify to them. So that's where, when you come to the 27 pay periods, it makes a difference as far as how you're going to have to handle that. And so what I know is that the recommendation that the compensation board, what I'm going to ask you folks at that budget hearing, is to only reduce their recommendation by 11.11% across the board, because that puts my deputies at 4% for the year. And that's what I'm also trying to get for the wage plan employees, because it's across the board what you can do. The other thing about, elected official refusing to take raise by donating to county initiatives or not-for-profit charities. I do that every year. In fact, I donate more to the charities for the last couple of years. I've done that. I don't need to put it on the front page of the paper how generous I am. I don't want to take credit for that, but I give my, out of my pocket, I give my employees a nice gift the last couple of years. I do that. And I do it for Karen and Heather also, because I work with them all the time. And I do it for a couple IT people that I work with that I appreciate the work that they do. But so when it comes to talking about this, I don't think that, it's appropriate that elected officials have to talk about what they do with their money. It's up to them to determine whether it's, those type of contributions that they do. And the way the compensation law is set up is that you build it into the budget. Those salaries are already there in the taxes, and that's why it's at the budget hearing. You can increase it, you can reduce it at that time, but it is built into the budget at that point, and I think that's a good way to do it. Some counties don't comply with that, and when I first arrived here, Woodbury County didn't do it that way either. And it was, it kind of got pretty emotional. As soon as the compensation board would make the recommendation, the Board of Supervisors would react to that. And I think it's good that the compensation board meets and there's time to cool off and gather information and talk about those things. And like I said, this might seem outrageous when it's taken out of context, when people don't really know the information that was provided there. I will say one thing, about supervisors. I have always advocated that I think the supervisors historically have done a disservice to the taxpayers of Woodbury County when you continue that they don't go with comparables. Because I remember the first year I was here, I was looking at that law, I talked to a supervisor that was on the board at that time, and I told him that. I said, why do you folks do that? And he said, well, Pac, if you get those wages up there too high, everybody will want this job. And I said, what's wrong with that? It's because that's the way it be. And those, those positions in Woodbury County, the Board of Supervisors position have become part-time. You all have different jobs that you're working at. You have to consider that we come to work, our elected officials, we work with our deputies, and we come to work every way, just like anybody else. We don't have other outside employment. The law is written that they do comparables, take into consideration of the cost of living, and I think the process worked, and I think it worked this year because the compensation board complied with the law. Thank you.
Let me just make one statement, Mr. Chair. I just want to be clear, and I really appreciate Auditor Gill's presentation. I thought it added a lot. Compensation Board, in my opinion, absolutely complied with the law. They did their job. And obviously, we have a different one to do with their recommendation. And I think the Compensation Board system is fundamentally flawed, which is why the legislature is looking at it. But that's for another discussion. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Sheriff Chad Sheehan. I would say that having gone through my first full year of the budget process leading up to starting in, I think Jennifer and I started meeting in October, November, I would like to echo what Pat said, and I was meeting with Dennis last Friday, and my wife, who is certainly the smartest person in our household, watching the YouTube videos of the board meetings, has asked me multiple times, what will you all do when he's no longer sitting in that chair? And Dennis, I hope you live till you're about 150, and I hope you stay working till you're 125, because I don't really know, I don't know anybody that knows the system as well as Dennis does, and I just want to thank Dennis for the outstanding job leading this year's budget process, because I think he's done a great job. And he, along with all of you, at this point, have, at least as of last Friday, unless it's changed, Dennis, you can correct me, have a balanced budget at this point with a 0% increase in taxes. Is that correct?
Tax rate.
A zero increase in the tax rate, yes. And so I think that's something to be commended. As a fiscal conservative and as a taxpayer of Woodbury County, I think that is important, and I would commend you for the work that you've done, and all of the department heads and elected officials that have helped make that process happen. But I would remind the public that the comp board recommendations for raises is included in that budget as it stands currently right now. So when that public hearing occurs on March 29th, you could vote as it is right now, and it would be a zero, how do you say it, Dennis? A zero tax rate increase for Woodbury County. I get that the reference to, I understand, and I felt bad that the comp board, following the law that was passed by the Republican legislature and passed by a Republican governor, was going to put somewhat of a target, so to speak, on the sheriff's back, because when you look at the comparable compensations of the Woodbury County Sheriff, the numbers were going to be huge. It was bigger than what I thought it was going to be. And so it's referenced in the deal, the largest raise in history. I would translate that to the most underpaid sheriff in the history of Woodbury County. That's how it translates to me. See, when you start equal, it might, Plymouth County, the sheriff there, Sheriff DeBrink, only needed a 13% raise recommended by the comp board to get him to his comparables, which they recommended a 6% raise across the board plus an $8,000 pay bump for him. The comp board recommended that to the Board of Supervisors, which amounted to that 13% raise, and it passed. So as it relates to the sheriff, for some reason the governor and the legislature sought to remedy this problem of being the most underpaid sheriffs, and it wasn't just in Woodbury County, it was across the state. And I just want to give you all, I don't know if you've seen it, some of you I think have, I think I shared it with Jeremy via email, I can't remember if I shared it with anybody else, but this is just the letter that the sheriff's comp board representative, Doug Phillips, prepared for the comp board. So if I may approach, Chairman. Sure. Just to give to you, I'll let you guys pass them off. And it's his letter basically explaining to the comp board what the law change was, and if the comp board was going to follow the law, what comparables were being used. And I didn't know that simultaneously Mr. Gill was working on a presentation as well. So to me, the focus of the raises that we're talking about come down to two simple R's: retention and recruitment. And I did speak to the Farm Bureau representative, and we discussed the conversations that took place at the last meeting. And it was my impression that that there wasn't there wasn't this outcry of disgust in the large increases that were being proposed. In fact, what he told me is that the business people that come to those meetings would be understanding that because of the very competitive labor market, the county would be, if they want to retain good employees and recruit other good quality employees, that there would be an increase in wages, not just for the elected officials, but everybody. And I'm focusing on the elected officials today because we've already discussed the other things, and I've stood up here and I argued on their behalf, and I have no qualms about arguing on the behalf of the percentage deputies. Several of them are here today, and they can only make a portion of what the elected official makes. And I know you all know that, but I'm saying this more for the general public to understand. So when you look at, I had Michelle pull some numbers for me. When you look at the 2021 reported income to, I guess their W-2s, my chief deputy, Chief Wingert, somewhere right over here, been with the sheriff's office 29 years now. And been second in command. He was the fourth highest paid employee in the sheriff's office last year. I was number one. A jail sergeant was number 3, and a road patrol sergeant was number 2. With the overtime that they worked, they both made more than what the chief deputy made. When I look at these other wages that almost all of my sergeants, because of overtime, are able to make nearly as much as the lieutenants and the captains, who they're set at what they can make. They can't make any more. I don't have any other way to compensate them. I can't give them, year-end bonuses if I was working in a doctor's clinic or if I was somewhere else. I can't do that. So when I say that this has to do with retention and recruitment, I have sergeants who won't take the promotional tests because they can work one overtime shift a month and make more than the person that's 1 or 2 ranks ahead of them. And for me, that's frustrating because there are good people in the organization that I know they're supporting families and they've got bills to pay. And at some point they say, I'm just good right here. I mean, if I'm a deputy, trying to think here, I've got it here, I think one of the deputies made $91,000 with overtime, which is, he's working a fair amount of overtime. But a lot of these guys, it's one shift a month for them to jump pay over a lieutenant or a captain. And to me, that's just wrong. I know in some of your statements, and I think maybe I misunderstood initially, I thought you had said you didn't agree with the wage plan and the elected officials making more than the union folks. And I think maybe and I'm referring to you, Mr. Taylor.
Yeah.
I think what you meant was raises, perhaps, not that they, is it
Elected
your
officials.
understanding that, I mean, I don't think it's I want to just clarify. It's not your belief that the wage plan employees, the middle management people, and department heads and elected officials shouldn't make more than the hourly employees. That's not what you mean, is it?
Yeah, so my statement was at a time when our union and bargained for employees are between 2.25% and 2.75%, 31% and 22% and 13% and 9% seem to the majority of our 400 employees to be 10 times as much as they're receiving.
Okay. So
By way of percentage.
So you do agree that middle management, wage plan employees, and elected officials and department heads would and should make more money in general than an hourly employee?
Generally speaking, yeah.
Okay.
I realize there'll
The
be
only reason
exceptions with overtime
Yeah,
and
the
other,
reason I say that,
people working
as a
on it.
base salary, I mean, is what I'm saying, based on a 40-hour work week. The reason I say that is because these, in addition to the percentage deputies that work under me, when they're salaried, they also have call. So they're calling, Captain Garrett last night because there's a death scene investigation. He's not compensated for that. They're calling at 2 o'clock in the morning. They're not compensated for that. So when they can work as a sergeant and supervise fewer people and have less responsibility and work one overtime shift a month and make more money, it makes it harder for me, the leader of the organization, to recruit people even within the organization to want to move up. Okay, so I just want to make sure that that's clear. If the comp board, if the legislature had not passed the Back the Blue law and the governor had not signed it, and the comp board was using the comparables from years past, they still would have been recommending a 28 to 30% raise for the sheriff. And so the numbers, if you look at, as Pat said, the Woodbury County Sheriff is ranked 10th with the 6th largest. Pottawatomie County, which is slightly smaller in population, their sheriff, while I'm at 118, is at 140. And his recommended raise is going to be 10%. So and I haven't seen if the board passed it yet or not, but if it does, it's going to take him to 154. And you look at some of the other counties that are smaller. Dallas County is the 7th ranked county. That sheriff is at 138. So I mean, there's Dubuque County. There's counties that are ranked 13th and 17th in population, and they make their salary is like $600 and $800 less than the Woodbury County Sheriff. And again, for me, it's about these guys and the ability to recruit and retain the people. That's really, really what it's about for me. And I get tonight is just information, and it's not for debate on what you all are going to do, so I'll save some of what I was going to talk about. But I would like to, go on the record and thank the legislature, and I would like to thank the governor for recognizing the importance of retaining the great men and women of sheriff's offices across the great state of Iowa. I mean, the actions of support from the legislature and from Governor Reynolds have been heard loud and clear from the men and women in law enforcement. And we want to thank them, especially in the shadows of what has taken place across the country, which when this was being passed, you have to think back to what was going on. And what was going on was there was a lot of talk of defunding the police. There was talk, while that didn't really take hold in a lot of locations, what did take hold was underfunding the police and cutting the police. And when you underfund the police and handcuff administrators, I think we can all agree that of what that negative effect is, both on the law enforcement officers serving the community and the public safety at large. I also think that underfunding is a very slippery slope towards defunding. And so we know, you can look at the numbers and see the tragic results of these policies and what they've caused in other areas of the country. And I want to make sure that we don't even tip a toe in that water, that we don't even get there. And again, I know it keeps being referenced, the 0% raise that the board took. And again, I would just remind you all that this is a second job for you. These are not second jobs for the people that are working for the county. So we can debate more when this is an action item and it's not just an information item, but I think it's important for the public to hear from me why I think that this, what the compensation board did followed the law. I think it was just. I think the raise is for all the elected officials, but I can specifically speak for the sheriff, is very needed and should pass as is. I know Pat and I will disagree. I think it should pass as is, but I appreciate you at least listening to me. So thank you. Thank you.
This was just an information item on how it is done. I'm just pointing that out. I was just saying, this was just an information on how this is done. This is not, obviously, the hearing. Go ahead.
Appreciate it. P.J. Jennings, County Attorney's Office, and I'm not going to keep you near as long as those last two people that talked to you. But I do want to just make a few comments. Like Pat stated, this was the first year that if everybody that came to that compensation committee meeting. I don't think I've ever come to one of those or ever went to one of those. And I've been in this position going on 16 years now. Money was just never my driving influence for doing this job, not even coming to the county attorney's office. I was making more in my previous job before I went to law school and came to work for the county. Money was just never a driving factor for me. And why is that? I grew up in a single-family household with a mother who I don't think ever made more than $25,000 in a year, ever. We never owned a house. We never had a family vehicle. I think that's why money wasn't a driving factor for me. So what I want to address here is just a couple things, and only because it's been stated that this was for informational purposes. So that kind of disappoints me a little bit, because if that was really the case, I would have thought that Jeremy or whomever else went to that Farm Bureau meeting would have advocated more for us, because what's in this seems like it was kind of advocating against us. And I'll tell you why. When you talk about the majority of the board chose to reduce your percentage, it would have been better for me to see that it was only a 3-2 vote. It wasn't all of you guys. It wasn't even 4-1. It was only 3-2. That gives a different message, that it was at least close. At least a few people thought that you guys should get that 22%. That would have been informational. And number 5, when you talk about elected officials, oftentimes advocate that they are taking the increase on behalf of percentage deputies. That almost seems like that's a farce, like we're only making that up. I've never really advocated for a certain percentage for me, because my deputy is single, doesn't have a family, doesn't have a whole lot of those things that a lot of these other deputies have. That's why I never really pushed that issue. When they had those compensation committees, and my representative asked me, what do you want to shoot for? Whatever they say, I'm pretty much good with. Until I started seeing where I was at, which came up just a few years ago when I started dropping, and now I'm down at 11th out of a population of 6th. That kind of perked my interest a little bit. And the sheriff is right there with me. He's number 10. Woodbury County's population of 6. So when we talk about advocating for our deputies, my deputy, there is no assistant attorney in my office that has ever, at least while I've been there, spent more time in that office than my deputy. And you won't hear anybody say that that's not true. So when you talk about advocating for my deputy, yes, even though he may not want it, I think he deserves it. These other deputies, they have families, they have kids, they have mortgages. I still live in the same house that I purchased before I got this job. My wife doesn't necessarily like that, but I do. So money is still not a driving factor for me, but I think you guys should at least consider that our salaries should be commensurate with what we do. And you do that by looking at comparables. And I would ask you to do that. Couple things. When it says our code does not prohibit an elected official from refusing to take a raise by donating it, that's kind of misleading, because it does prohibit us. It's not like we can say, oh, give that money away and we don't pay taxes on it. That's our money. We pay taxes on it. Yes, we can give it away, and I give a lot of money away. In fact, most of these employees at Woodbury County give a lot of money away. I think we've broken a record for United Way 3 or 4 years now, I think, or whatever it's been. At least we did this year. That tells you a lot of people give a lot of money away. I'm included. I've always given money to United Way, and I give money to a lot of other organizations that you never hear about. But we do. But I pay taxes on that money. So that's kind of misleading right there. The other thing I would have hoped that would have been in that packet if it was informational, and Pat has brought it up, and the sheriff has brought it up. Tell the public where we stand. Just put it out there. I didn't see anything in that packet that went to the public that showed the sheriff is 11th ranked. The county attorney is 10th ranked. You being the board, not necessarily you guys, you only caught the auditor and the treasurer up, but then the last, I would say, 8 years, I think you kind of caught them up to where their salary should be. It hasn't always been that way. That would have been informational. And so I would just like you to consider some of those things. And as we go down this road, maybe we don't get it. That's fine. But at least put everything out there. Just put it all out there. Just don't slant it as though it's something we don't deserve.
And to make that case, we can receive this information given, and that would show in our minutes, and correct? Yeah, so I'd like to move to receive the documents given to us by the auditor and the
Second.
sheriff. So
I'd
motion
like
by
to
Ragg,
respond.
second
And I'll
by Taylor.
leave with this comment. Somebody pointed it out to me, and I didn't see it, that it wasn't even my representative that in the journal stated that the Woodbury County is seriously underpaid, or something to that effect. But that wasn't even my representative. Again, informational. Put it out there, just so people can see, the public can see that. Thank you.
So we have a motion and a second to receive. Any discussion on that? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 4-0. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I take a little bit of umbrage. Nothing in here is non-informational or slanted or intended to mislead. In fact, I appreciate the comments that it was good and informational and factual, which it is. Simply presented the facts of what Iowa code allows and doesn't allow. And with that, you have that information. In fact, we want to move to receive that information. We want the population to know where you're ranked, Mr. County Attorney, in relationship by population. I also want the public to understand why the Senate study bill takes into account economic considerations and taxes, which is not something that anybody mentioned. The level of property tax intensity and economic considerations isn't something that the Compensation Board looks at all. So what you'll hear oftentimes is, I'm paid 11th, but there's somebody who's higher paid, and we're the 6th most populous county. That's a pretty simple way of looking at this. I'm not making as much as this other person. We're 37th as a Board of Supervisors, and that's fine. But there's a reason that I've advocated for that, because I understand the property taxes that people pay, working families pay, will have an implication. In fact, if we take action, as we have been advocated to do in the 11th hour, after our budget was set on number 12, it won't be a tax flat rate. It's an impossibility, because we have this information sort of last minute. In fact, we won't be at a 0% tax rate. So with that, that's one of the things I have to answer, and this board has to answer to the public that asks these questions of us. Why are you considering 9, 13, 22, and 31%? We have to answer those questions. And so to be able to say, this is the way this compensation board system works, I think is factual, and I'm happy to present the information that our county attorney presented in order as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
So may I just make one response? When asked why, the answer is because if you don't, if some board doesn't stand up and do the right thing and properly compensate the people that are doing the laborious work for the county, it just gets kicked down the road to the next board. And so, again, to me, that's the answer. We're gonna actually, pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, and because we are in good enough financial shape that we can do it, we're gonna do it this year. We're not gonna wait until one person's off the board and hopefully Matthew's still in his seat this time next year. But that, to me, that would be the answer. We're gonna do it. We're gonna finally have the whatever you want to say to actually get it done this year, because we can, because we've made these financial decisions, which I think I started my whole presentation with applauding you all for that. And so because of that, we're not going to just continue to kick the can down the road. We're going to do what's right by the employees. To me, that's the simple answer. And the statement about the legislators not understanding exactly what was in the bill, to me, might be a little bit of a cop-out. I mean, they drafted the legislation, they passed it through committees, they voted it in, and then a Republican governor reviewed it and signed it. And to me, it's a difference between back in the blue being a campaign slogan and being actually something that they believe in. That's the difference to me. And so if people ask me, that's what I'm going to tell them. I hope that this Board of Supervisors has the guts and the intestinal fortitude that they're not going to kick the can down the road to the next board. They'll do it this year, get everybody caught up like they should be, because you've made those good decisions financially, and we can move forward year after year.
Anything else for the informational item that's not been said? Moving on to item 11 from Board of Supervisors, Jeremy Taylor, Matthew Ung, approve state and local fiscal recovery funds for purposes in accordance with the Department of Treasury's final rule, and to appropriate the intention of funds up to $10 million to be used for the purposes laid out in the agenda item. Go ahead, whoever wants it there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So this item is something that Supervisor Ung and I put together and looks at the next $10 million of ARPA funding in order to give some broad appropriation strokes to what we intend to do in the spirit of the Department of Treasury's final rule. So with that, I'll kick it over to Supervisor Ung if you want to explain some of the background and some of the places that we're looking to support this funding that we think will be appropriate use and be good by taxpayers.
Sure. So these are benchmarks. This is a framework. This isn't necessarily a guarantee of exact dollar amounts. We'll have to act on anything that is actually spent. This is an appropriation measure. We obviously have expense reports we need to file with Treasury, and those reflect the exact numbers. And obviously, we've acted on a couple things already, including the funding to Steel and District Health, which has already been is already considered an expense at this point. You'll notice the largest item here is $5 million proposed for increased HVAC, UV lighting, CO2 sensors in existing buildings and in new construction buildings. This is importantly to mitigate the health and safety impacts of COVID-19. There are additional steps that can be taken with HVAC systems such as UV lighting and sensors, which do increase the price and will increase the price. And for example, the new law enforcement center. And as we're looking at the long-term health of this building, the board does need to consider, replacement at a time when we can plan for it and not have to deal with a crisis. And those are very expensive replacements, and so that's why we're looking at a number so large. Hopefully, half of that or more is within the law enforcement center, just from the figures that we've been receiving. And then we have some additional funding in Siouxland District Health. This is something that's kind of a moving target because it is based upon the percentage of time they spend dealing with the health impact. And so next year, as I said in a previous week, hopefully the appropriation is less, but we'll look at that. It's something we can look at in the next couple of years as well. And then the other items, you have water and sewer, which is explicitly, named in the legislation, the final rule. Other things that are covered, and some flexibility there to use some for other areas that are allowed, such as tourism, supporting small businesses, and nonprofits that qualify, that there's an application process that Joshua approves of, and that we can look at there. So.
Can you reference the amount of money that we allocated this fiscal year to Siouxland District Health employees? Do you remember what that?
I think it's $1,291,000, I believe.
Yes.
We also have some amounts listed concerning rural broadband access, $750,000, $500,000 of worker retention pay. We have already allocated when we moved to try to have people at roughly a 4% in our bargain for employees. So that would come out of those funds. $250,000 to nonprofits using an application process for food assistance and those disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. $250,000 in funding for employees related to hiring at 7.5% above pre-pandemic levels. This would go to the correctional facility, the new jailers potentially, and $250,000 to economic development in the form of grants. I'm hopeful that some of the detractors that may not hail from this area and have been critical of this board, mostly in my absence, but in taking the standard deduction are listening and to some of the broad brush strokes at which we're hoping to use this money. So with that, any other comments, Supervisor?
No, I just echo that. I hope people are listening, and it does kind of discourage me a bit that when this board did allocate $1.29 million to district health, as far as I can tell, there was absolutely no media mention of it whatsoever. In print, TV, nothing. I mean, this is what we actually did with the money, and it's really discouraging, to be honest, because we talk about, before the final rule came out, what we planned, what we anticipated, what we hoped for. We got raked over the coals for what we were hoping would happen. But when we actually do something, we have people writing, op-eds in the Des Moines Register smashing, what this board's done. We have absolutely no knowledge or no transparent admittance that we have actually allocated money in areas that, such as COVID-19 relief. And this was an actual appropriation. We actually are going to expend this money. And to make a $1.29 million appropriation and receive literally no mention, print, radio, nothing, no one knows outside of this room what we did, and that's kind of discouraging. So I do hope they're listening, but, their ears are probably plugged.
Dan Heisel, Woodbury County Conservation Director. I guess you mentioned water and sewer. How much were you putting in for doing water and sewer?
We've roughly looked at $1 million in expansion.
Because, you know, the last several months, I've talked to you about this, and I was told that sometime we'll get to that system, but we went ahead with Browns Lake on our own with CIP funds to do that water and sewer. We have Bellamy Campground at Little Sioux that you and I have talked about,
Yeah.
Mr. Taylor, that definitely really needs it, and it fits everything that these ARPA funds bring. So I just want to make sure that what the amount was, and just keep that out there in front of this board.
Yeah.
that,
So that's one of the,
process.
yeah, that's one of our things, Dan, in doing this. It's not altogether unlike CIP funds, you know, how we say, here's what we're approving, and yet it's not really quite approved yet. We're hopeful that this allowance says, okay, there's $1 million out there, so what would Bellamy take? Let's sit down on Conservation Board, come back, and here's a project proposal so that you can move forward on bringing something back before this board. Because I think, like you mentioned, it's a perfect use of these funds and doesn't have any of the sticky wickets tied to doing something with communities that seem like it might not be appropriate. So
Okay.
I look forward to working with you on
I
it.
just want clarification.
Yeah.
So thank you. And you're right, Matthew, we don't hear about the 1.2 million that goes out, so thank you.
So my question then, are we doing this as a general guide for what we're going to spend? Because I could see spending more on water and sewer, and I could see us having a challenge trying to give out small business relief or, because there's no fair way to do it.
Yeah, so two responses. One, I think that this would be, as I mentioned earlier with the CIP funding, you know, here's kind of the broad brushstroke intent. And then as specific projects come back, for example, in the correctional facility, or if Kenny comes forward with a ventilation system for Trosper Hoyt, you could say, here's $350,000, and we could allocate it into these certain line items. I do think that this is a movable target. SEDC, I think, would be the most fair vetting process. I've sat on that before, where they have the expertise and the knowledge as a small business. Plan comes before them and says, you know, last year I had to lay off 3 employees and we had a downturn in business, but we want to rehire. And, you know, I think that they could set up something like that. But to ultimately answer your question, you know, I think that some of these could go up or down based on if we say we actually have a project that's going to be 1.5 million, so we have to reduce in other areas. I like this because if I hear one more time from somebody, you're just taking $15.6 million and putting COVID funding to jail, which isn't true, I like to be able to say this is what our intent is to do with this, and we have vetted this through our county attorney's office very, very closely to make sure we're living within the spirit of the law. So, sorry for the long answer.
Yeah, so I see some of those as the 250,000 as being some of the more complicated things to figure out how to take care of, where like, you know, if we did water or sewer grants, obviously those are cut and dried and real clear and easy, and of course the challenge then becomes, you know, if we help, say, Mobile with a project, but not Correctionville, then we create an unfair situation there too. But part of that is, you know, who had a project when there was funds too.
And I think, and Joshua, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, one of the difficulties is expanding in incorporated areas, water and sewer, because we're a county, so easier projects or lower hanging fruit might be in conservation, what's outside of an incorporated area. Is that?
Yeah, there's a question out there as to the extent that an entity can assign or cooperate with another entity in expending the ARPA funds. So I think we would be on much firmer ground on a project that was solely a Woodbury County project than something that was done within city limits or that was piggybacked onto something else that another entity was already doing.
The other thing I like sitting on the conservation board is when we do water and sewer, you've alluded to the fact that increased revenue may be coming into conservation by having that. Is that good? So just a thought on that.
One more thing, just in regards to the comment related to vetting through the county attorney's office. I do appreciate there's been a lot of very specific questions on this, and I know that the board does, in my interactions, is being very careful about how we're allocating these and making sure that we stay on the right side of the rules. And I am comfortable with these general categories. They're clearly permissible categories within the final rule. As we come to the actual expenditure of the funds in each project, we're still going to have to look at them to make sure that all the different guidelines are being followed. So as has kind of already been said, this is a framework, and then each project, each expenditure will have to be designed in compliance with the rules.
Thank you for all your guidance along the way. So pending any discussion, I'd move to approve state and local fiscal recovery funds for purposes in accordance with the Department of Treasury's final rule and to appropriate the intention of funds of up to $10 million to be used for the purposes laid out in this agenda item.
Second.
All right.
Sorry, I was waiting for someone on the phone from Eastern Iowa.
Oh, okay. Motion by Taylor, second by Young. I was going to say that I was just going to tell everybody in the public that PJ just said we can spend it all this way according to this item. Just teasing. All right, so any further discussion on this item? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 4-0. Going to move on to item 12. Which is 12A somehow. We got the budget review discussion approval for FY 2023 from the county auditor, consideration of a method to apply the approved increase to annual wages of salaried wage plan employees.
I just want to offer some preliminary information here is that I said that this was late hour. I honestly thought that this was being considered. I don't get involved with what Dennis and Michelle do as far as putting the budget together for that sort of thing, and I realized that at the end what was occurring. When it was brought up, they were talking about the term was used non-union, and I always considered wage plan, your department heads and management people who work with a salary. And just this afternoon, I always call it the auditor's chat room, but there was some information, a question was asked, is what counties had done, and this is what they had approved for what we call wage plan employees. They call them non-union. And several counties responded to that, and that was just, I wrote this down as I was getting ready to. Greene County granted a 7% raise, Lee County 10%, Boone County 4.5%, Buena Vista 8%, Plymouth County, just to the north of us, 6%. Bremer County was the low at 3.5%, Grundy County 6.5%. Sioux County doesn't have any unions, and all county employees received an 8% raise this year for fiscal year 23. Calhoun has no unions, 6%. Crawford, no union, 5%. And Franklin County at 6%, and the only union they have is Secondary Roads, and they opened their contract and gave them a 6% increase too. So it's just, in response to what people are talking about as far as inflation. And that's what generated what occurred with the compensation boards around the state. And so when it was talked about and the folks, the collective bargaining units came to you and asked, and so you tried to, even it up, give them 4%, but it was during that period of time that I started digging into it, what actually you had approved and what was going to happen as far as wage plan employees were only going to get a 0.15% increase for their pay period. I Googled that, talked about 27 pay periods and how folks handle that, and there's a nationwide human resources consulting firm that surveyed their employees, and 86% of the respondents do not lower those wages during that period of time when it occurs, 27 pay periods. 6% do what we're talking about doing, is dividing 27 and adjusted benefit deductions. So only 6% of the private sector that responded would handle it in that way. 5% other, and then 2% what was suggested is pay twice a month instead. Go to bi-monthly payroll. And that was suggested to us, and if Michelle and I talked about that, we thought you're going to have at least one more employee, maybe two, in order to handle two payrolls, because hourly people get paid on a bi-weekly basis, and we would have to be running two payrolls concurrently, so that's just something we don't see as being plausible. The city of Sioux City, the way that they do it, and I gave Dennis an email from what John Myers, I had lunch with him today, former city finance director. They do it on an hourly basis, so they don't face this either, is that all wages, when they advertise, they do it hourly for all of them, so that they don't have to deal with this issue either. And one of the things they talked about in here, and this is, it's a big issue, is about the morale of your employees, especially when we're facing the pressures from inflation. That when I talked about those other counties, those counties, this doesn't have anything to do with the 27 pay periods. It's what the county employees around the state are getting for raises to deal with this issue. And so, that's when I know that Dennis and Michelle had been talking about it all along, because I'd heard them say, we have to plan for 27 pay periods. I thought it was being done, honestly. And so when we get to that point. So what I'm proposing here is that I think the motion is that you just take the last pay period that the employee has for fiscal year 22, multiplied times 1.04, and you do that during that fiscal year. And at when it goes back to 26, even with the elected officials, you can take that into consideration, is that they're going to get a raise next year, and that board, you'll have to decide that during that budget time next year about what they do. But just from what I saw when you had those discussions, and it was good debate. I always appreciate it when the folks go back and forth and talk about what you have to do, what you have to consider. And honestly, it was at 4%, and I honestly, don't believe that folks understood really the impact that it was going to have on wage plan employees, salaried wage plans, wages, until fiscal year 23, July 1st of 2023. So that's why, just ask for this clarification. I'm recommending it, and I think that it's a fair way to deal with the wage plan employees for the coming year.
Go ahead.
I appreciate the spirit of this. I appreciate knowing the issue. you know, I understand we've talked probably ad nauseum about inflation, and I think I shared the 8 member counties of Rolling Hills being at 4, and I was actually higher in my recommendation, between 4 and 5, but, and same with Sioux City. But at any rate, I want to follow the compliment just by a little bit of heartburn, if that's okay. The last meeting was the final meeting in which we could do anything to increase our budget. And it was during citizen concerns that this issue was brought up after probably 11 weeks, an issue that had occurred 11 years ago. I actually agree with you, and I have come to agree with you and have come there from about a week's past because I looked at that same thing. And if 86%, either 86% of people are doing it wrong and 14% are doing it right, or maybe I'm just on the wrong side of the argument, which I can be moved. At this point right now, Dennis, I'd like you to explain, this is going to have a fiscal impact, and it is difficult. I'm glad we're having the discussion because I do want to do the fair and right thing. I do think it's not too late, but can you just explain a little bit of how we do this at this point? Before the last meeting, you said we can't do anything but go up or down in the budget, and how is this going to work?
The only thing we can do, we're limited to how much taxes we can ask. We have a maximum levy or maximum tax asking that we're going to publish. That's going to be a hearing March 8th. Anything done now would either come from reserves or other cuts. So this impact here on the 29 wage plan employees, which are only salary, because it only affects salary. Hourly people have gotten their 1 day every year, and leap year they get 2 days. So that's how the wage plan salaried people do not get that benefit there. It all accumulates to the 11th year. So the total cost there for that is $81,579.
My concern as well is that the assistant county attorneys
Okay.
are not included in this, and that they're under the same
And they should
implication.
And they should be, even though they're union, they should be included because they're only union people are actually salaried people. So yes, they should be included, and that involves 17 people, which is 74,724. So you're talking about 156,000 total.
So the statement, and I want to come back to this because, and I'm appreciative that the sheriff said you're at a 0% tax rate, not after this. I just want that to be clear. And I want it to be clear, this board is trying to do this, do 4%, do the, one-time ARPA money. I'm going to advocate for this tonight, but I just want people to understand, after doing this tonight, are we at a 0% tax rate without making other cuts?
Yes, because we cannot raise it. So we are going to be a zero tax rate, flat tax rate. We cannot raise it.
We cannot raise it, and so the cuts are going to have to come from somewhere else. Is that correct?
Cuts or reserves.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
I have a question if this has any impact, negative impact on deputies of elected officials. Is there some prohibition that we have in applying an increase bi-weekly for a comp board annual recommendation? Question for Joshua, and if so, can the comp board meet again and fix that? Because this ideally would have been passed, to coincide with what we're doing now from the comp board.
So I'll answer the last question first. The comp board, there's no way that they can meet again and come up with a new recommendation just with the timeline of things and how it's set up. I don't think you could apply this to deputies because the way it's set out in the code is the deputies' pay is a percentage of the salary, and it's an annual salary of the elected official. So you couldn't directly do it. There is possibly, for some of the deputies and some of the offices, There's a reference to that 85% being their base pay. And there's a possibility of longevity pay potentially that could be explored that could make up the issue. And that wouldn't be, that can happen outside of the comp board recommendation and all that. So the short answer is it could potentially be addressed for some of those deputies, but it would be in a little different manner than what we're talking about here.
So you're saying that each elected official would have the ability to leverage something like longevity pay to make up for any disparity?
I think it's a possibility. I do want to look at it a little bit further. I know that for at least one elected official, longevity pay is not a possibility just based on the code, but I think it is a possibility for the others.
Go ahead.
There's also, as part of that, their base pay is their percentage. After that, they can draw overtime, they can draw longevity, they get supplemental pay. There's another possibility, and they add one more item in there. There's like 4 or 5 items that can be added on to that base pay.
I think it references fringe benefits as
Fringe
well,
benefits,
whatever
yes,
that
thank you.
means.
Yes. So you can do supplemental pay, you can do longevity, but I think it'd all be up to the board to help make this up, so the deputies don't get shortchanged. And we can give you a number, we can figure out numbers for that too.
And if I may add, Board of Supervisors, that one deputy that is not, this would be my deputy, and I can tell you, don't let that stop you, because he would not have an issue with that.
Thank you. So what was the amount for the assistant county attorneys?
The amount was $74,724, and the reason it's a little less than what I originally had said, 91, 17, there's 17 of them going to get that $1,000. So to get to that 4% and get this all leveled out, they still get the 1,000, but then the 17 will get a portion of that 74,000. That way you're covering that 27th pay period that actually is covering for salaried people the last 11 years. Now, you know, they said we could put this in reserves. It'd be very hard over 11 years to put 155,000 away and expect that to be there 11 years later, because you're gonna have different boards, you're gonna have different personnel involved. It's better to come up with money at the point the 11 years hits. It isn't that much money. Now, you go to City Hall, that's a whole different ballgame, because they have a whole bunch of salaried people there. We don't have that many compared to City Hall or maybe school board or whatever, they're all salaries.
So 156,303, is that what you're getting?
Yes.
So that covers everybody except those that have other boards like EMA, the county library, these other,
We have a whole list there. but that
yeah,
goes in
district
there.
health and the,
Come up with the money. We notify what we're doing here to give them the same opportunity, but it'd be up to their boards to come up with the funds to do it. In most cases, it's not gonna be a whole lot of money.
So I'm going to be supportive of the 156,303, but I'll tell you, I'm only going to be supportive because it'll come from other cuts. That's what I'm going to support. So,
And one more thing, secondary roads, that's about 30,000, it's not included here, 30,515. He has to readjust his budget because he's locked into a minimum levy, so if he does 30,000 here, which will follow the same plan we're following, but he'll have to readjust his budget somewhere by reducing something by that 30,515, which he can do.
So that's the fund 0020.
Yeah, secondary roads.
I got you. Okay, yeah.
and they're not included in that 156, correct?
They are not. So it's actually about 186
The
that
only
it's
thing-
going to cost.
The only thing Josh might check out too is with assistant county attorneys that we aren't violating any contract with those attorneys. I don't think we are.
Go ahead.
Since it directly affects our office, and it would be a conflict for us to do that, we are staying out of that particular question. If the board was desirous of an opinion on that, it would probably be appropriate for the attorney that the board uses for labor negotiations to wait.
So my opinion is that they can, not that it's a legal one, but they could grieve something, but if they grieve this, it'd be an odd thing.
It'd be an odd thing, yes. And it's the only union that's affected, because all the other unions are hourly, and they do get their full checks.
So do we have the number? Or
156,303?
Yep.
I thought that was plus a 30,000 or something.
That'd be,
Well,
we
that's,
don't have to worry about that, because he'll adjust his budget
Okay.
within his budget.
I would move to appropriate $156,303 in order to have a 4% increase for salaried wage plan employees to their biweekly amount for each pay period of FY '23.
I have a motion by Taylor, second by DeWitt. Do you have any other discussion on this item?
And I'll be offering cuts that can make up for this, so we keep it at 0% rate.
All right. If there's no other discussion, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Nay. Passes 3-1. Thank you for all the input on the regular agenda today. We have reports on committee meetings next, which is item 13. Matthew, either you two? I'll double check my calendar here because I've been really busy. Wasn't you? Okay. I had a shipboard, which we discussed some new members. I'll be leaving that one soon, and
Jumping ship, are you?
yeah, jumping ship. Thank you. That was excellent. All right, moving on. Item 14, citizen concerns. Round 2. Come on up, sir.
Todd Harlow. I'm just curious, when is a good time to talk about wage plan employees? I'm not union, I'm not a percentage deputy.
I think we just had the discussion on the agenda. You could speak now on it.
It will, actually, the appropriate time is at the budget hearing. That's when that item is supposed to be discussed. No, did you say wage plan? Yeah. Oh, no, come back here.
Can the board, I know it's too late for this budget, but can they do a redoing of our matrix system, get this thing up to date, it's way out of date, and then go from there
What matrix are you talking about?
for wage plan employees, which he's included, we're all included in it. There's 27 people included in that.
What the matrix does is it defines by position when the step should be, what the percentage step should be, and and then when a raise is set or a cost of living is set, then that's applied to the wage plan, but you kind of have a standard by position, and they do comparables to develop that matrix.
Because we have instances right now, I know one department head that actually gets a step increase, he's not the top, plus he's gonna get this bump also. The rest of us don't have that opportunity because we've maxed out our, it hasn't been redone for probably 20 years, the matrix system. Doesn't mean everybody's getting a pay raise, but at least gets a system where potential they do have a merit or a step increase that they haven't had for 20 years. All they're getting is a cost of living every year. It's just a thought. Something maybe HR could review. They did it before.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to
Well,
Todd here.
I
He's waited
just-
patiently. Thank you,
I just
Todd.
want to say, I'm the 5th largest jail. I'm 10th in pay. I'm 18,000 below the next highest. Next year, we're going to be the 2nd largest jail in the state, and here I am, clear down below again. So I'm just kind of curious when. Jeremy asked the emergency service director a couple weeks ago if he had comparables. He did not. I did. didn't do any good. Mr. Wright said something about it be irresponsible if we did it all at once, which I agree, but a nice monetary amount would help to get it up there, not all at once, but work its way up. But you guys just keep putting it off, so.
And you're not a percentage of the sheriff?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
So I fight for myself, the sheriff, the chief. So I don't know where everybody else is at, wage plan, but I know where I'm at.
Sure. And I do know in, discussions with the union involved in your facility that we had discussed as the revenue comes in, we open that obviously we expect to change things then, and I think that that would obviously include your position as well, so.
We've been fighting this battle a long time, and it's just, we don't get a raise, it just keeps going down compared to everybody else, so I'm just kind of tired of it.
Thank you. Anyone else to be heard on citizen concerns? Board concerns? So personally, I'm concerned over the legislature not pursuing an eminent domain bill over the carbon pipeline. So, Joshua, I did want to ask you about the potential to pursue a lawsuit with the state over giving eminent domain to a carbon pipeline.
We'd have to give that some more thought. I don't think that just as a county there would be standing to bring that suit. I know if eminent domain is granted by the Iowa Utilities Board, there's a process for landowners to appeal that decision to the courts. And I know at one point there was a request made to go across county land. I don't know if that's still the path that it's taking. We're also looking at selling that farm as well. So there may be standing as a landowner, but it's something that we can look into if the board is desirous of doing that.
Yes, any other board concerns?
Real short one, I talked to Matthew before the meeting that next week we'll have to adjourn the board meeting, have a meeting with Grant Township to approve a claim. So kind of be like we did the drain dishes, you go in and out, put it kind of in the middle of the meeting.
Go ahead.
Just for the good of the public, as concerns budget, anything else until March 29th?
No, we have our March 8th hearing, which is actually having a public hearing on our maximum tax asking, shows the percent we're going up. And just comparison, we're way less than the city of Sioux City, and we're way less than the tax rate. But that's where we pass the resolution, that's the maximum we go, and then March 29th, we have our public hearing. So there's only 2 hearings between now and the end of March.
Just to clarify, we can only take action on those 2 dates, or we could take budget review action anytime before?
You could take budget review action before, but it's finalized at the end. It's usually good to wait till the public hearing, because you'll have more people here if you want.
But we can't increase at this point,
No, you
anything,
cannot increase it, no.
As of
Tax
last-
asking cannot increase.
as of last week, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I had it sent to the publishers in rural, you have to be there a week early. There was one more thing that Michelle mentioned, which is true. Grant Township needs to put a budget together. And I don't know, it's the board, now the trustees, acting trustees, until they do get a board put together. So we can probably get the forms to them, what the valuations are, and we should probably have a time where we set a date for the public hearing on Grant Township. As one that's not even Woodbury County's township.
The forms do get sent to the clerks, and they were sent to the clerk in January, and we have not received anything back yet.
It should be a separate meeting either before or after their board meeting.
Back and they adjourn the meeting, and then go to the Grant Township meeting, then come adjourn that one, go back in, or should be entirely separate.
Why don't we just do the Grant Township meeting at like 4:15 next week?
Just why we got everybody here, so we don't have to come down extra time.
And you have to invite your clerk.
Well, she can be invited.
You can,
She just has to be notified, the public meeting, and she's required to post it.
Yeah, it's her duty to be here too. So, go from there.
The posting is required of the clerk, but we can note in our agenda. the meeting.
Pardon?
The posting of the meeting is required of the clerk, but we can note the agenda
You
at
can
the
note
end
it
of
on-
our
You can note it
agenda.
on the agenda just like you do other meetings. But it's a separate meeting and
Right.
just post it on our, yep.
Okay.
All right, anything else for the good of the cause? And we are adjourned.
So what you want me to do is I'm gone next week. So do you
Let's
want
send
me
it.
to just give you like holding last year's property taxes like we have
Let's
in
do
past
that.
years?
Let's do that.
Then if they say yeah,
Yep, we can have a
Post.
meeting, before 4:30,
then
like
you have to have a
4:15.
public hearing.
Set a date for the public
Yeah.
hearing. It may not be March
So you
29th
can
or
get
50th.
that, because I won't be here,
Okay.
but I'll give you the
Give me
with
the forms,
those
yeah.
numbers on it tomorrow.